All right, Christianity and the History of Science. This is our third meeting, the most disorganized of the 10. This one is particularly going to be driven by things that came up in the question time during the previous two. Next time, we will be getting into our textbook. You don't have to have the textbook to follow the course, but if you're wondering where I'm getting some of this stuff, this is the solution to the mystery. It's Nancy Pearcey and Charles Thaxton, The Soul of Science. You can order it from Amazon, probably from other places too. There hasn't been any arrangement made to get copies of it, but it is a good book. We're then going to take the first two chapters next time, chapters 3 and 4 the time after that, and I think there will be one more doubling up of chapters, and then we will get to the end of 10 talks, most of which have been about just one chapter in the book. So welcome. What I want to start with tonight, actually I will do nothing else, but I'm definitely going to start with this. Tying up a loose end from last time, a question we got during the question session. You're now about to see a slide for the third time because it's a slide that was in the first talk, got reviewed in the second talk, and got a very good question then. The slide was, a common misconception about science is that it's a fixed body of knowledge that you can memorize. Science is what's in science books, and you memorize it and produce it on a test, and that's how you prove that you know science. I replied, no. Science is constantly growing and changing. I gave lots of examples of that. Some of what we think we know now will be disproven in the future. New discoveries will be made. Well then, and at least one intelligent member of the audience asked, if science is constantly subject to change, why do we believe any of it? Won't it all be different in the future? Shouldn't we just disregard it now because in 50 or 100 years it's all going to be different? If science were just a human creative thing like art or, well, this is not even my philosophy of art, but it's many people's. If it were a human creative thing the way many people think art is, then sure enough, anything now will just be discarded in the future sometime. But science is the study of the real world. Things are real. And the really big thing to understand on this point is not all scientific results are equally strong and confident. There are things we are more sure of, and there are things we are less sure of. Some of the knowledge that we classify as science is supported by huge amounts of data and understanding. Those are the results that will hold up or change only slightly. They can't change much. There's just too much already backing them up. Other scientific conclusions are less confident, supported by smaller amounts of data, with less confidence in the assumptions that you have to make to get the result, and that's the kind that get replaced. But it's not just two kinds, it's a scale from more confident to less confident. Here's an example of something about which we are very confident. The Earth orbits the sun. That is supported by many straightforward observations that don't require assumptions that are likely to be questioned. It's been tested in many ways, including space probes. I know there was a time when people didn't believe that the Earth orbited the sun. An older belief that the sun orbited the Earth had to be overturned, but the evidence that overturned it was so good that we don't expect this one to change. Here's a less confident belief, again from astronomy. The quasars are billions of light years away. Well, this is something scientists are confident in, but less so than the previous one. There still could be a trick to it. estimating the distance of the quasars requires not only observation. The only thing we can observe about them is the spectrum of the light they emit, because that's all you see, a faint point of light. There is no other way to observe them. You can't travel to them. You can't travel far enough that you see parallax showing their distance or anything like that. So there are assumptions about the expansion of the universe and how that affects the spectrum and enables you to deduce distance from spectrum, and some of those could be wrong. So this is a somewhat less confident belief. And here's a low confidence belief that you'll find in astronomy books, that the universe will keep expanding. It seems uncontroversial it's expanding now, but will it keep expanding? This is widely thought likely to be true, but disputed. There's observational data coming in all the time that seems to shift the balance of evidence one way or the other. The whole question about dark matter in particular, how much mass is there out there for gravity to act on? So this is one that might change. I've seen them waffle on it already during my short lifetime, which relative to astrophysics is a fairly long lifetime. There has not been advanced astrophysics for that many decades. Now, another point of logic, something I'm going to come back to, is we don't prove theories true, we only prove them false. Prove that scientifically, says somebody. The word proof is a term of logic and mathematics, not science. In logic and in mathematics, a proof shows that something follows logically from something else. In science, we don't prove theories, we support them, or we disprove them, or we come up with evidence that weighs against them. So somehow have you ever heard anybody say, give me scientific proof of that? What does that mean? Scientists don't go around dealing in something called scientific proof. If they mean give me scientific evidence of that, okay, that's a reasonable question. Now, another thing about the way scientific theories and beliefs get overturned is the new theory has to cover all the data that the old theory did. You don't get to throw out something that accurately accounts for a lot of observations and experiments unless your new theory accounts for them at least as well. So the boiling point of water is not going to change to 300 degrees in some future chemistry book. No, there's just too much already confirming that it's 212 degrees Fahrenheit at standard pressure. And any new theory about why or how water boils is going to have to fit all the observations we've already made that our understanding of it now already covers. Back when it was proposed that the Earth orbits the sun rather than the other way around, the big issue for something like 300 years was, can you really calculate the positions of the planets as accurately this way as you could the old way? If you can't, you don't have a case for the new theory. It has to work as well as the old theory and better, or it can't replace it. Now, last minor subpoint here, scientific progress doesn't happen in newspapers. It doesn't happen in the kind of events that newspapers report. Newspapers are designed to report sudden events. This frustrates us sometimes with politics and economics because a complicated economic issue will get covered in the newspaper as if it were a sudden event. And it's actually always a very gradual thing that people are trying to understand. But with science, what makes the headlines in the newspaper is a single surprising experiment or observation. Scientist in California discovers something. And it's a result that may or may not hold up. There's always a chance of an experiment getting the wrong result because of some unrecognized source of error. And I'm going to say a lot about that today. What actually makes science is the gradual accumulation and adjustment of theories over years. And newspapers don't understand that very well, and even when they do, the very nature of a newspaper means they have to package things as if they were sudden events when they weren't. This gives you the impression that things are being overturned and discovered totally surprisingly all the time, and that's just not how it works. There is a complication with science and whether it relies on good evidence or not. In medicine and in other applied sciences of various kinds, we often have to make a decision even if the scientific evidence supporting it is weak. Ponder that for a moment. If you're a doctor, you have to either give treatment A or give treatment B, even if the evidence telling you which one is better is rather weak, because you have to do something. When you're in that kind of situation, you are often going to have to use scientific evidence that is vulnerable to getting overturned by better evidence a little later on. And a further complication, in medicine and similar applied sciences, we often have noisy data, that is, random variation in the things we're observing, unknown additional factors, samples smaller than we'd like. So the scientific evidence, particularly to choose between medical treatments, is often weak, but it's better than nothing. This is why medical recommendations get overturned so much, and so much is different from what it was even 20 years ago. But here's a really important point. It seems you've probably gotten the impression that medical science is very fickle. They're saying one thing one year, next 5 years later, they're saying a different thing. I know I have had a condition myself. Well, this may be too much information. There's an intestinal disorder called diverticulitis. It used to be thought very important to do surgery for it. I declined that. It was then thought very important to give an antibiotic for it. Okay, been through that a couple of cycles. The latest recommendations apparently don't treat it at all, just get a little bit of rest. And you come out as well as if you'd done any of the others. I am not a doctor, please don't take that as medical advice. It's my caricature of a bit of science I've followed. Is there anyone here who is in the medical field, by the way? Okay, do remember that when I give you examples from medical science, I am not a doctor, I am not medically trained. I don't have malpractice insurance if you do the wrong thing. I used to ask people who were giving me unsolicited advice, where did you go to medical school? But I figured out the real question is, do you have malpractice insurance? Okay, and a really important thing here, when the medical field is having trouble choosing between two treatments, it's generally because both of them do some good. I mean, maybe it's better to take aspirin for the flu, maybe it's better to take Tylenol, I've heard them argue about that. Both are way better than taking cyanide. So this is not a world in which you just can't believe any of them. They're either giving you the best or something close to the best that they know of. Especially in medicine, beware of headlines that have surprising new results because they usually don't hold up. There are alarming headlines in newspapers every day, and in 6 weeks you're hearing no more about many of these discoveries. What you should trust are analyses that combine large numbers of earlier studies and then are accepted by other researchers in the same field because that reflects increasing understanding, not just chance results that might be erroneous or might involve something that the researcher did not realize. Okay, let's take a short break from thinking about that to think about something else. That's the best kind of break, right? Use a different set of brain muscles for a moment. Why are we doing all this in church? I have been standing here this long. I have not quoted the Bible. I have not made a single point of Christian doctrine or morality. Why are we doing this in church? Well, one aspect of it is we glorify God by appreciating His creation and by thinking clearly. He never gave us a license to be stupid. I know He didn't give us all the same amount of intelligence, but He certainly wants us to use what we have. Didn't give any of us enough intelligence to understand everything that He has in principle made us capable of understanding. More importantly, this is a love your neighbor thing. People look up to us for information and advice. We are highly educated people. An enormous number of people trust each of us. And we have a duty to be accurate and wise when we pass along information or when people ask us for advice about something. My answer to almost any medical question is ask a doctor, but this is part of love thy neighbor. We need to be equipped to actually do good for the people around us. And that includes knowing when to say, I don't know. I'm not Gossip Central. I won't talk about just anything that people want to hear about. There are subjects on which I know I'm not qualified to give advice. I don't have educated positions on them, educated opinions, and I'd be doing you a disservice if I just gave you a wild guess. I know back during COVID, people kept saying, watch this video, it will convince you. And I would reply, if it convinced me, that wouldn't prove anything. Will it convince my doctor? Will it convince these 3 or 4 medical researchers I know, and so forth? There is yet another reason a Christian might want to appreciate science, and that is doing scientific research builds character. I actually think there is a moral quality that is strengthened by doing science. It's honesty and open-mindedness. In science, if you are dishonest, it's quite likely you won't be caught, but your research won't be very good. You'll be producing results that don't hold up when other people try to confirm them, and after a while, everybody's going to start thinking, well, he's just sort of flaky. He gets odd results, doesn't know why he gets them. He must not be so good. If you are arrogant, and you've seen a lot of arrogance about disputed scientific matters, mostly from people gossiping on social media, not from the scientists. If you are arrogant in science, that means you're making your mistakes out loud for everybody to see. They will see them, and you will again lose credibility. So science is a sport in which you can't cheat. And I think that's a good thing. I've also seen people actually benefit from realizing that science demands humility, that you will catch your errors, you can't fudge over them. It just can't be done. If you can't admit an error and correct it, you can't get anywhere. That's been a personality-changing event in some people's lives. So, with all that in mind, I now beg your permission to do a little more that's not directly in the textbook. I'd like to give you some hands-on information about how science is actually done based on my own experience and things I've reviewed. I've worked in several different scientific fields over the years, including actually some medical research, though I am not an MD, and that is a sentence I have uttered many, many times in those labs. To which Jim Semple said, of course not, you're a real doctor. Ph.D. Melody met some of these characters when I was doing that project. I want to talk about how science is actually done. One of the fundamental problems of scientific research is we can't observe laws of nature. We want to discover laws of nature, but we can't observe laws of nature. The only thing we can observe is a limited number of instances or examples of a law of nature at work. Always only a limited number of examples. Philosophers call this the problem of induction. Aristotle, remember him way back when, also pointed out another thing, which is even if you could observe all the examples of something, you still wouldn't know that you'd found a law of nature versus something that just happened to be true of all those examples unless you found a reason for it. So we're really trying to discover how things work, not just how things happen. Well, how is this observing done? The point of logic I mentioned earlier needs to be brought out a little further, which is we spend our time trying to prove our hypotheses false, not true, usually. Sir Karl Popper is the philosopher who has said the most about this. Popper is the non-Christian philosopher from whom I have gotten the most, by the way, other than Aristotle. And he's well worth reading. He has some good thoughts about lots of different things. Suppose you're trying to find out whether all dogs have fur. All dogs have fur. Is that a law of nature? How would you test it? How would you prove it true? You'd have to examine all the dogs that ever were or will be. How would you prove it false? Find one hairless dog. Now, there have got to be some. There are breeds with very little hair, and there have to be dogs out there with skin diseases and so forth. So this is the point. Proving a hypothesis false is usually much more within reach than proving it true. And a well-supported hypothesis, according to Popper, is one that's been tested in ways that it's vulnerable to and survived. Particularly in medical research, an experiment is often framed in terms of a null hypothesis. The null hypothesis is not the thing you hope is true, it's the thing you hope is false. This is a rather subtle point. It's in every statistics book, but it often goes by so fast that you aren't quite sure what went by when they introduce you to this idea. Suppose you're testing a medical treatment. The null hypothesis would be that the treatment doesn't do any good. And then you want to try to disprove that. Disprove the notion that it doesn't do any good. And the more strongly you can disprove that, the more certain you are that it does do some good. This is the usual logic of statistical studies in the biological sciences. In particular, what you do is you calculate how unlikely is it to be true given the results. The more unlikely, the better, because you're trying to shoot down the null hypothesis and show that instead the treatment does have a benefit. When you read reporting of medical research, you always have to wrap your mind around this step in the logic because it seems to always be there. Particularly in medicine and biology, also in economics, which is the field in which I'm doing some things now, we have noisy data. No two patients' bodies are exactly alike. Maybe one of them got well and the other didn't for reasons unrelated to the treatment. That's very common, actually. Covington's law of medical research. Somebody will get well no matter what you do to them. What do you do about the problem of noisy data? Well, suppose you are testing a medical treatment. You want a large number of patients, right? Something that seems to have worked on 3 people is not nearly as good as something that seems to have worked on 6,000 out of a sample of 8,000 or something like that. That's much better. You want a fair sample. That is, the groups you are comparing need to be alike. If you compare a treatment on 180-year-olds, 80-year-olds, and then your group that doesn't get the treatment is 108-year-olds, you're going to see a lot of difference between the groups whether the treatment had any effect or not. So you need a matched sample, and the sample needs to be like the other people you're really interested in treating. So there's been some criticism lately that because experimental groups in medicine often are not racially diverse, there are genetic peculiarities that they are not picking up that then turn out to be common in some other racial group. So that's one of the newest diversity issues. Now, here's a mathematical surprise, math to the rescue. You can calculate how likely it is that your experiment got the wrong result due to random outside factors. You can actually calculate what is the chance of getting it wrong for an irrelevant random reason. That's called the significance level, and it depends on the size of the effect that you're detecting. Obviously, a small effect is harder to detect. It also depends on the number of examples. In medicine, the number of patients or number of cases, because obviously more examples will be better at detecting an effect and separating it from variation with other causes. Now, here's the technical slide. Ever heard of something significant at the 5% level? If you took a statistics course, you did. A significance level of less than 5%, sometimes reported as p less than 0.05, is considered a significant result. That doesn't mean it's proof. It only means it's good enough to keep pursuing the idea and doing more experiments. That point is often forgotten. People actually doing research will say, oh, I have a significant result. That shows I'm right. No, it only shows you have less than a 5% chance of being wrong. Now, riddle me this. You do 100 experiments. How many of them are likely to be wrong? 5, maybe, if they have a 5% chance of being wrong. So that's why we wait for results to be supported by more studies, always. You don't want to trust just one experiment. You want to wait for many more to replicate it, to confirm it. Now, newspapers often report that somebody found a significant effect of something on something. When the newspapers say significant, they usually mean they are reporting one experiment that had a less than 5% chance of being wrong. In other words, that's not exactly a knockdown, drag-out proof. It only means you have something worth pursuing, something that has a chance of being true. Two other things we look for in medical research, and these have analogs in other sciences as well. In medical research, we look for what's called a dose-response effect, and we're not just talking about doses of drugs. We're talking about whatever the cause is. If A causes B, then more A should cause more B, right? If there was an infamous study that I looked up, someone reported a study that seemed to show that drinking Diet Coke caused strokes. Well, Diet Coke is not the most nourishing substance in the world, but does it cause strokes? This paper surprised me, and it immediately started getting criticism. I saw it in the newspaper, looked up the scientific journal it was in, and it had responses immediately from other researchers. And the essence of it is they found no dose-response effect. No different, the people who drank 5 Diet Cokes a day did not come out worse than the people that drank 1 a week. Okay, fishy result there, fishy result. I don't think that result held up. This is an example of one of the things we look for in any study that shows something causes an effect. Does more of it cause more of the effect? If not, you may have a spurious result. The other thing we look for in medical work particularly is biological understanding of why something works or might work. If someone does a study and finds that carrying a gold coin in your pocket prevents heart attacks, I have not seen such a study. This is a made-up example. The problem there is there's no fathomable way how it could do that. Maybe they need to look for something, or maybe they just got thrown off by random variation. A lot of superstitious beliefs are basically based on one case and no biological or scientific understanding of a mechanism. We're trying to find out how the universe works, how God's creation works, not just a lot of things that by coincidence happen to have happened. Okay, I seem to have gone through this material faster than I planned on, but that will give us a good long question time, which will not be recorded for the privacy of the question askers. Do I have any qualifications to talk about medical research? You're wondering, last week I was a computer scientist, still am. I worked with now 2 or 3 different groups on using computer analysis of language to measure the language impairment in patients with schizophrenia. And you'll find my name in medical journals about that. And goodness knows, to this day, I get asked to be a peer reviewer whenever anybody does a study of that. And I have to say, I'm no longer working in that field, not keeping up with it. But the big thing is the logic of significance testing is the same in all sciences. So I was really talking about method, not about medicine here. We will cover chapters 1 and 2 of the textbook next time.